Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to call to order the Joint Facility Subcommittee meeting with the Lowell City Council and the Lowell School Committee. Madam Secretary, would you take the roll, please?
Chairperson Doherty?
Here.
Mr. Bahu?
Here.
Chairperson Belanja?
Here.
Mr. Dakota?
Here.
Ms. Scott?
Here.
1 absent, 5 present.
Thank you. At first, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. This meeting was requested by the school committee. We don't have a big agenda for tonight, but I think they're very important items that we'd like to walk away with, more than just a conversation about where we're headed, but actually some timeline commitments that we could get from the city on some very important projects moving forward. I don't know if anybody would like to speak before we get right into the agenda. No?
I think we can just begin with the first agenda item.
Okay. So we request the superintendent provide an update and the mayor convene a joint city council meeting, that's why we're here tonight, to discuss the status and work planned under the New American Schools grant, as well as the timelines and the work required to use the Jandark School, which is going to be the George Sapasaris School. And I see that we have our DPW commissioner here. I'm wondering if Mr. Sincere would like to tell us where we stand with those projects in particular.
So yes, thanks for having us here tonight. It's great to be able to share some, I think, really good information with you. So in breaking this up into two parts, looking at the Renew America Schools grant, I'm grateful to have Catherine Moses here with me, and I'm also with Rick Underwood from the schools here. Ms. Moses would be able to give you a rundown of where we're at with that. She's really been the team's leader with pulling these things together, with a lot of people doing an awful lot of contribution, but I think she can give you a great summary of this.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about all of the wonderful things that are going on in the city and in our schools. I, for one, remain especially optimistic about what we've already accomplished and where we're going in the future. So as way of background, one of the reasons I feel so optimistic is that Lowell has always been the kind of place that looks for all of the above solutions when it comes to increasing our energy efficiency, making our facilities more functional, looking for opportunities for funding outside of the normal channels. And I did just a quick back of the envelope calculation, and between the grants that we were able to secure through MSBA last year, the grants that we were able to secure through other state funding, partnerships with our utilities. Last year, in calendar year 2024, the City of Lowell invested almost $29.4 million into our facilities. And so we are extremely excited about that. The nice thing about these kinds of investments and the ones that we're going to make going forward is it not only makes the infrastructure in our school better, but it can also put us on a pathway to get away from some of the unfortunate things that we've faced within the city. I know one of the things that's very near and dear to the hearts of many of the people here is making sure that we have adequate cooling options for our school. And so in looking at the things that we already have funding sources identified for or that are already underway, we believe that by the time that Lowell High School is fully online, almost half of our students within the district will have functional cooling. And we're hoping to be able to expand this as we continue to look for additional sources of funding in order to get our infrastructure where we need to be to make our schools more efficient. And so that brings us to the Renew America Schools grant. Last year, we were very fortunate to be selected as one of the communities that was going to receive the Renew America Schools grant. This is a multi-phase grant. In last year's competition, we were awarded a total of $15.3 million. $300,000 of that came in the form of a prize. The prize allowed us to begin to enter into negotiations with the Department of Energy. We did those negotiations throughout the fall to encumber, I believe the correct word is obligate, the additional $15 million over the next 5-year plan. So the first phase of the $15 million is a phase where you're doing design work, you're creating a strategic plan. That's about $1 million of it. The phase after that is construction. Once you've identified what your priorities are, then you can go ahead and move to the construction. There are a lot of steps in between, but we think that even though there is some uncertainty around the federal grants at this time, we know that we were able to get our grant in place and accepted by the 1st of January 2025. So we believe that as it makes its way through the court system, that this money will eventually be available to us. But the other thing that's really great is that the way that we structured our particular grant program is we decided to use the prized portion, the $300,000, which we already have in hand, to do the first step before the real grant work begins, which are ASHRAE Level 2 energy audits. And I think these are something that we're really excited about. We have a vendor that's been selected. There will be a permission to enter vote coming your way soon on the school committee, and I'm happy to talk about more of it there. But we were able to also leverage $230,000 from our partners in the utility in order to get these types of comprehensive building assessments done that will cover the entire 23 schools that are within the grant. We believe that the timeline for that piece of it will extend into the early summer, should be completed before the end of the school year. And that gives us the entire kind of roadmap of what we need to do to get our facilities up to functionality, to help reduce our emissions, to reduce our energy use, to reduce our energy costs. And we're looking forward to starting that process very soon. And we think that in the timeline where we're finishing up that first part, then the additional kinds of litigation that is happening to allow us to access the additional $15 million will have worked itself out by then. But I always remain optimistic because I know that we have a great partnership between the city and the schools, as evidenced by the fact that we're at a joint committee, including both the facilities and the schools. And I believe that whatever pathway goes forward with the federal government, that we in Lowell will be well poised to continue to implement comprehensive solutions for our portfolio. We are very fortunate to be situated in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We know that the Commonwealth is very dedicated to ensuring that we have functional schools that are also in alignment with the Commonwealth's emissions reduction goals to get to net zero by 2050. There's one other grant that just dropped today, just hours before the subcommittee, that I'll be looking into to see what opportunities are there. We have partnerships with the utility, which last year that yielded us, I think, $879,000 worth of incentives to do work within our schools. And we know that these partnerships will only grow and get stronger. And so if once it makes its way through litigation, the timeline for the grant, so we'd have 2 years, so around January of 2027 is when we would complete the energy audits, the strategic plan, and the design work, as well as the federal requirements around historic preservation, National Environmental Policy Act, compliance with things like the Build America, Buy America provisions. And then once all that is approved, then we'd have an additional 3 years to actually build out the types of things that we prioritize in our strategic plan. And with that, I would open it up to any questions, comments.
Well, I will say thank you, Ms. Moses, for that report. It sounds like our sustainability goals for our schools are very much on track. So keep up the good work. We'll keep going after that grant money as best we can. And so that's great news. Thank you.
If I could just follow up with a question, I thought it was a lot of good information to kind of absorb at once. And I just want to make sure I understood correctly. You said we use the $300,000 to start these energy audits, and you expect that they will be finished by the end of this school year?
But before the beginning of the next school year.
before
We're
the beginning.
trying to finish them by the end of this school year, but there have been a couple of delays, and so we just want to make sure that we allow for adequate time to get the analysis for what we want. But before the fall of 2025, we believe that those should be completed. And all along the way in the Renew America Schools grant, we'll be providing periodic updates for the school committee, just so that you know where we are in the process, you know the kinds of things that we're discovering through the energy audits, through some of the other things that we're looking at through the grant.
And I guess my only question then is, when you talk about litigation, so we're not exactly guaranteed we're going to get the funding then, because of what's happening at the federal level?
I think everything at the federal level right now is really in question. So we're not sure if we'll get the $15 million. But like I said, with the energy audits that we already have the funding for, we believe that that can at least give us the kind of blueprint where we can start going after additional MSBA funds, additional funds within the state. Like I said, the Green School Works grant just dropped today. I'll be looking deeper into that as the evening goes along and bringing additional things. We also have consistent funding that we get from the Green Communities Division of the Department of Energy Resources. We utilize different mechanisms to pay for projects with our utility partners, and those have been pretty significant over the years. I know that we're just getting ready to start a 3-year plan for the energy efficiency programs within Massachusetts. I know that there are specific carve-outs in there for funding that is available specifically for schools that hasn't been available before. So we think there are still going to be opportunities within Massachusetts. We do think that the federal money is still in litigation. I remain optimistic
Right.
because I think that, we had a contract, an obligation before the new administration came in. If I were to speculate, I guess that's not a good thing to do in the current environment, but it might mean revamping some of the things that we were looking to do through the grant that are more aligned and focused on functionality versus greenhouse gas emissions. But the fantastic thing about Lowell is we always look for those places where you have the functionality and the convergence with greenhouse gas emission reductions. And so we believe that we will be well poised once everything is settled to continue to move the ball forward.
Well, certainly the energy audit is going to be helpful information. Councilor Dakota?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You actually asked the question I was going to ask, but if you don't mind, unless somebody else has questions concerning that, if we could move on to St. Jean d'Arc part of the motion, and maybe Mr. St. Cyr or Mr. Underwood can give us a recap of what's going on at this point.
Mr. Bahu?
It's at work, very exciting. The energy audits go to be in all the buildings, 23 of the buildings is quite the accomplishment considering how old a lot of the buildings are. I'm just looking for a little clarification. By January 1, 2027, will those 23 buildings all have cooling through them? Will they all have air conditioning?
So by January 21st or January 1st, 2027, that depends on whether, what kinds of measures are decided. So the energy audits are the first part. They will identify potential measures that we could implement. From that, you would create a strategic plan. Every single school has to get some kind of measure implemented in it. We don't know exactly until we get the audits back what the available measures are. And, and it's probably one of those things that it's going to be a kind of, weighing pros and cons of what we do in certain schools, to get the functionality that we're looking for, to get the energy savings that we're looking for. But all of that is part of the strategic plan development, which if things remain on kind of task, we should know that before the end of the calendar year in 2025. Then you would start going through design, project management, owner's project management, going through the different federal regulations and making sure that you have a part of that. But I know that the cooling solutions is a big area of emphasis. And I think one of the things that we're going to be looking at in the audits as well is opportunities for decarbonization and electrification. And that might be the pathway, particularly for our older schools, which weren't originally plumbed for cooling options. And so all of that will be a part of the energy audits. And then from that, we can kind of determine what we're going to do at each place. But whether it's done through the Renew America Schools grant, whether we have to continue to search for other funding solutions, I know that some of the terrible conditions that we've experienced in our buildings are things that our division, the sustainability division, is committed to improving and committed to finding ways to do things, whatever pots of money that comes from.
So I'm hearing that it's a school-by-school basis.
Correct.
As far as the cooling goes, but the energy audit will be an ongoing thing throughout the whole 23 buildings that we discussed earlier in this.
The energy audits will be completed through all the 23 buildings. Like I said, that's going to be before the next school year begins. And then from that, we can determine what funding is available to come up with comprehensive solutions at those 23 schools, whether it be cooling or other measures.
Thank you. Mr. Rossi?
And I'm sorry for being late. My question is from what I believe is the solar panels outside of the Robinson School, right? But it's also a danger, right? Because if a kid got into a fight and picked up one of those bricks, right? And they're not secure. And there's window platforms and bricks. Like, what are we doing to assure that safety or securing it on the weekend?
That's an excellent question, and that's something that we didn't really address in our discussion of Renew America Schools because we have multiple project types that are going on, and you're correct. We have had delivery of solar panels to the Robinson School, to the McAuliffe School. I know that the Wang School, we've already begun construction on that, and that's well underway, and we will also eventually have that kind of delivery at Lowell High School. If there are particular kinds of I know that I was just by the facilities over the weekend. And maybe it's because I don't necessarily know all of the different kinds of things that students can get into, but if there are particular concerns, and that's something that I can take back to our vendor, I will be speaking with them on Thursday. I can send an email as a follow-up to this after this meeting. If you have particular concerns, I think we definitely want to make sure that everything is safe, that our students are safe, and that we can protect the students as well as the infrastructure. So I'd be happy to follow up with you afterwards.
Yes, thank you, especially because that's a very enclosed area and nobody can see what's going on. Thank you.
Mr. Dakota, did you have another question?
It was just concerning the St. Jean d'Arc update. I know Mr. Bahu had a question, but I did want to delve into that with either Mr. Underwood or Mr. St. Cyr, where we're at, what the plan is for a full reopening, half reopening. I'm hearing by next September, next school year, that we should be fully open. So I'll leave it to them, Mr. Hall, Superintendent Skinner, either one.
I think Mr. Sincere,
So I do think things are progressing at the former Jeanne d'Arc School. I think the bones of the building are terrific. Recently, we've just gone through the process of assessing submissions for the OPM, and we're looking to move forward in these coming weeks. We'll be meeting together with the schools to identify what those needs are, to be sure we're including that kind of scope in the work that we put in front of us, and that's also going to determine what we'd be looking at as far as a completion or timeline. And addressing, what contingencies might be there if we're able to get so far. Are we able to open the building on a limited way, or what? We know that it's, space is always a concern. And so we're, looking to balance all of that. But I think what will be telltale is what comes out of the final scope that will be pulled together in these coming weeks or month and a half or so.
Is still, is still next September the target date?
Ideally, yes. If we could pull all of it together, that would be perfect for us, but it's, I think it's going to be by September.
Just for clarification, are you talking September 20?
No, I'm talking the following September.
Right, September
26.
2027.
Right, yeah, I apologize for that, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, in the perfect world, if the stars align, great, and we would love to think that we could have it open at that time.
So I know we've got to figure out what the needs are first before we can develop the timeline. I'm just wondering what would be a reasonable time for this committee to meet again, where we could get something in writing that spells out a timeline, so it's not just us talking about it, but actually having a plan. Because as we are looking at our programming needs, we need to start planning out what we're going to do in the meantime with the children, what our options are. So would you be comfortable with having a better idea in 6 weeks or 2 months? What do you think would be a reasonable timeline? We can't make a commitment until we know fully what the work is where I'm coming from with that. So I'm open to your thoughts.
So ideally, I guess we would say probably 2 months, but I think that will take some conversations happening with the OPM to see, how deep and how many layers of this onion are we going to find as we really go through this and determine that scope. But certainly, we can, keep the superintendent and everyone aware of where we're at in the process and maybe update the date from there, if that seems reasonable.
If I remember correctly, when I was with the school department, one of the buildings was actually about 75%, we could actually move in. Is there a chance that that first building would have the opportunity to have fewer than 80 school students into that school? Or are we looking at just waiting for the following September? Ricky, you want to answer it, Ricky?
I'm sorry, I was, say that again?
I know that when, actually, me and you had toured the school last year, that one of the buildings was pretty close to actually opening with a few minor repairs. Is that something that the school department, and Mr. Skinner, you can chime in as well, is that something that the school department may be looking at and bringing in, let's say, 25 to 30 students from the 80 school, or are we looking at waiting to the following September, bringing all of the 80 school students, plus I would imagine your future plans are to bring in students from other districts, so it would make advantageous for the city?
It's a great idea, Mr. Dakota, such a great idea that we've already implemented it. We do have sections of what was the Jeanne d'Arc, we're now referring to it as the 80 school program at the Sapasara school, but it was the old Jeanne d'Arc convent, and you were right, there was that, and it was a great idea that with some minor repairs, that building could be opened up sooner. It's already been put in place, and we have, I think, on the order of 30 or 40 students in this school year. And it's been a big help to us. It's also quite a big complication for us because we now have a school that's in 2 separate campuses. But yes, it's already in place. And if I may have a question related to that, is it possible that some of the main building that's not going to be online in the very near future, like say the first floor of it, could that open up sooner than the whole building?
I had John getting out over our skis without having that scope really developed with what that's really going to mean. If it's possible and there's less work than we suspect, I don't think that would be an issue. But I think, in likelihood with some of the accommodations that we'd have to make and this becoming a fully ADA compliant building and the needs of the students that are going to go there, I think the work will be considerable. And clearly we're not going to want to have construction going on and within the same building, top floor, bottom floor, and so on.
Ms. Scott, Council Scott, sorry.
Thank you. I was just going to comment the same thing, that we may not want construction happening while the students are there. And also just as far as the 80-day, the current school, is that just a year-to-year lease right now, or is there a longer-term lease on that?
I think it's a 3-year lease. I'm not sure where we are in that lease right now. Up for renewal.
Okay, I just didn't know the consideration of that with the project, so I guess we'll have to have conversations when we learn the scope, I guess, of.
Yes, but if it's up for renewal, we'll feel obligated to renew that lease in Chelmsford in the interim. We don't have any choice, it seems.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Underwood?
One of the things important to understand is the OPM is just part of the project. We have to give the OPM instructions. So what we're actually going to be using the building for is going to really dictate the timeline for it. So, for instance, the CSA classrooms and special ed classrooms, they need sensory rooms. They need, we need a cafeteria. We're going to do a cafeteria. So we really have to get an idea from the school department and start to do it fairly quickly and determine what we're actually going to be using the building for. Is it going to be a middle school, elementary school, a special ed school? And then we have to give that information to the OPM to really get this thing moving forward quickly. But I agree with the rest of the counselors, or the counselors and the committee members, that I don't think it would be proactive for us to start to use the building in a partial manner. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen there. There's an abatement that has to happen. The elevator has to. There's a lot of stuff that would be disruptive in a regular school setting, especially if we're using it for special ed or CSA or autism. Those kids have very unique situations where, noise and that type of stuff. So the OPM is just a small part of that. We need to figure out what we're doing with the buildings. We have the Freshman Academy coming online. We were hoping was going to come online in 2026. Now with the high school problems there being prolonged for the project, that also adds a little bit of complications to the process. So,
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Bahu?
I keep hearing about an OPM. However, I think I read the local newspaper fairly often. Do we put in a request for a proposal for an OPM? Do we have an OPM hired? When were they hired? And how often are we meeting with them? Because realistically, September of 2026 seems pretty far out based on the amount of students that we have in Lowell Public Schools. We're over 14,000 right now, and it seems to be growing. So it's important, we hate to rush a project to make the building ADA compliant. However, it is something that is a real need for us, and we seem to be spending resources from the school department to rent the school that we have the AD school at over in Chelmsford that is costing us hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. And we spent $2 million to purchase this building, and, under the pretense that the city would assist us in getting this online sooner rather than later.
And so we're knee-deep in this process, so we went through the assessment process that we would typically go through from the different firms that gave proposals for doing this work. We've gone through that part of it. We've narrowed that part down, and now it's in the process. It'll go through law, they'll be contracted, and we'll be moving forward with the OPM, like I said, in the coming weeks.
Okay, Mr. Dakota.
So there is no OPM, but we're hoping to have one realistically by May 1st.
Just from listening to Mr. St. Cyr, I think it'd probably be in our best interest to probably have a meeting again in 3 months. That would give him ample time to come up with a scope of services. And 2 months or 3 months? Mr. St. Cyr?
I did say 2 months, but depending on how the OPM is onboarded and what the time that the process will take to develop that scope, we would send an update along with the schools to say that whether we're on target or if we're going to be delayed by a couple of weeks or something like that.
I would make the motion that we reconvene in 3 months.
Ms. Doherty?
I will second it.
I think for context, particularly given Ms. Scott's question, which is very helpful, I want to be careful that people know the facility in Chelmsford, the AD school in Chelmsford, is no longer meeting our needs because the population of students has grown so much. So prior to, it was just such a relief valve when we found that we could use the convent at Jeanne d'Arc for this year. But what happens when we don't have sufficient space for these autistic students? Several of them who are diagnosed and who are in regular ed classrooms or regular education schools who may be eligible to go to the 80 school are held back, perhaps. That's one possibility. But the other, and the one that's going to happen more and more, they'll go out of district. And that is hugely expensive. And so you can put it on me to bring us the next time, if you care, to look at the costs that we're expending and to look at the numbers. So somebody also mentioned here that with like loads of space and lots of space at the Jeanne d'Arc building when it opens, we have enough space for our children and to bring in some other kids from other districts that will then pay us. That's also out the window at this point because our own numbers are growing at such a rate. We diagnose them, students with autism, as young as 3 years old before they're in Lowell Public Schools, and once they're diagnosed, we're obligated to give them services. We are looking at our numbers of 3-year-olds who are diagnosed now, and we can tell you with great certainty the numbers are just blossoming and growing. So we long before we have Jeanne d'Arc fully opened and ready, we're going to need additional space. And also great emphasis on autistic students because of the nature of the 80 and the Jeanne d'Arc, but for other needs as well. And if the delays in projects, including potential delays at Lowell High School, which holds up our Freshman Academy building, we will need to find other space to house our students, both the 80 school in Chelmsford students, as well as many others.
Ms. Del Rossi?
So many students diagnosed with ASD most often don't need an IEP. They need a 504, just accommodations. So where are we delineating that of who may need a out-of-district placement? Right? So that's my question, and are we guesstimating or estimating this right? And are we paying for this off property in Chelmsford continuously? And there's a lot of factors that go into all of this. So I would just like for you to address.
Mr. Rossi, you makes a great point. The fact that we're talking about students with autism does not mean that they need any services for that matter. There's a spectrum. But if you can imagine, if the total population of students diagnosed with autism grows, then even though the number who might need out-of-district services is a relatively small percent, that percent or that population is growing as well because there's a bigger number of them overall. There's still going to be lots of students with autism whose programming is in the very same classroom as every other student in a regular school, and that's appropriate. But then there's still, because there's more of the students with more needs, some of them will be eligible to go to the 80 school, and some of them, if the 80 school doesn't have capacity, space, or staffing, will need to go out of district.
I want to go back to something that Mr. Underwood said. He's talking, that there's more information that you need from us even to give to the OPM, right? So I think this idea of we'll reconvene in 3 months, but also whatever information the school side needs to provide when you're meeting with the OPM to be looking at, is it possible to get the work done that we could at least use some of the convent, that piece of it? Because it is a situation that we have the students, we have to provide the services. So does that sound like a reasonable, we'll take on our role of helping to provide you with the information you need for the OPM in a 3-month timeline, which brings us to June 1. And I don't know if that's too late, Superintendent Skinner, to make a decision about.
That's only 60 days, July 1.
Oh, it's July 1.
Sure, may I comment on that for just a moment? I think a meeting.
July 1.
A meeting is a great idea. I know the city council has to come up with a budget, and I believe that's in early June to mid-June. So I'm going to request about 10 weeks for this next meeting, and maybe June 17th, which will give, a chance to hire a project manager for May 1st, get them on board, give them 6 weeks, give us 6 weeks to come up with a plan, begin to work together, and then maybe we can begin to work on timelines. Does that seem fair?
Yeah, it's July 1, though. 3 months is July 1, not June 1.
I'll amend my motion.
Yeah, mid-June's good.
Freddie, would you say June 17th? I'm fine with that.
So by the middle of June, we'll have an update, we'll have a better sense, and the school side will provide whatever information we need to provide so that you have, you know, what the OPM needs to look at, how do we go forward with this? I know we need a second, we have a second item, but
Yes, we do.
want to talk.
Councilor Getchell, do you have anything to comment on this before we move on?
Question.
How are you? I would just say to you is that right now elevators are running a long time. You know the occupancy of the building. You better get ahead of it and get your elevator contract out. It takes a year and over a year to get that piece done. So I would give the city the right to go and at least get the elevator piece done. So get a engineer contractor out right away. You know the occupancy of the building, so you'll know the size of the elevator and get that out tomorrow. Because the asbestos stuff or hazardous waste stuff, wall stuff, that's the easy stuff. The elevator is going to push you off, as we're seeing another project that we're doing right now. And that's really what the challenge is right now in the industry, is that elevator. So I would suggest that you don't hold off for 3 months and come back and say something, but you actually go out and actually procure some elevator stuff and get that moving.
That's great advice, Councilor. Thank you.
Mr. Underwood?
And I welcome that thought. I think that's a good point. There would be the possibility that if we wanted to scale back the construction, we'd have to have conversation with the city, but we could do, per se, the abatement and use the school. If the numbers worked out where that would be beneficial to the school department, to the city, there is the opportunity to do the smaller work first and go ahead and use the school, back out the elevator work to maybe 2 summers from now, or however long that timeline. But we could potentially do the abatement and use the school. We'd need the abatement, we'd need to wire it. Now, a lot of the wiring has already been done for cabling and networking. We've got to jump on that already. There is that potential. They would have to have a conversation between all the parties, but if the numbers worked out to where it's more beneficial to use the building now than it is to prolong the construction project, it is a possibility.
Mr. St. Cyr?
Yeah,
He doesn't like that.
I hate to be like, the Debbie Downer about this,
Right.
but I want to be realistic because I know, there's so much riding on it. And so with that, I mean, we know that the mechanicals there are in, desperate need. This is not going to be, really being able to reuse them, and especially in light of, some of the services that are going to be held there, and whether there's extended programming during the summers and things like that, that we'd want to make those accommodations now as we're building that out. Now, that's not to say that it would be possible that the building was, say, it was complete and we were able to provide access, ADA access to, say, the main floor while they're finishing the elevator. So that would keep people on it, but I don't want to get, again, too far out over our skis and make promises that we don't know that we could keep.
That's why we're going to come back to it. I want to go on to the other topic, but is it something quick, Mr. Ross?
I just had a question about abatement. What is the definition of abatement?
Abatement would be anything that has to do with hazardous materials, whether it be asbestos or lead, primarily asbestos and lead, but those would be abatement. Every year in all of our buildings, we do what they call an AHRA test every 3 years, and they identify any asbestos that's in the building and the condition. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you have asbestos in a building, that it has to be abated. What they do is they look at it, they monitor it, and if there's any problems with it, then they put together what they call an action plan, and then we have to address it. The school was used 2 years ago, or I think 2.5 years ago. I'm sure, without, not betting my salary on it, but I would assume that building has already had its an AHRA testing and that it would be passable. I've looked at the floors, we've seen it. You could use it, but it would still make sense that we would want to get in there, do the abatement, do the mechanicals, get a timeline on that, and then forego the elevator for another time. But I think that portion of the construction could be done a lot faster and most likely save the city and some funds or what it's going to cost to outsource these kids in the next year or two.
So we have a motion on the floor to call this joint committee for an update on June 17th. And I think we can just do all those in favor? Say aye? Aye. And if we could jump to the second item, just because I know we're running out of time. We're looking for an update on the athletic center. I don't know, Mr. Underwood, are you comfortable doing that?
I'm in constant contact with the OPM team, the construction team. I make them weekly meetings. We're, like I said, we're in contact every single day. We're tracking these problems through emails and texts. We're documenting them on the Procure and updates every week with the project. And that's really, at this point, that's really how we're tracking everything. I know they've been making some progress on the things that was on the punch list in the new gym facility, but it's still ongoing, and it's a fluid and constant conversation that we go back and forth on until we get what we feel is a viable condition that we all expect it to be. We'll continue to fight this fight with the OPM, the construction team. But I can assure everybody in this committee that I am very active on that, and on that project every day. I argue every single problem that I see. Some of them are brought up by the OPM, some of them brought up by this department directly. But we are on that team, and we're not going to stop until we get exactly what we deserve, or we'll find, some other remedy. I won't comment on what the remedy will be. That will be up to the city to decide when it's done, but I can assure you from this department, we will stay on everything that we deserve to get in our $400 million high school.
And so really, just to echo what Mr. Underwood said, the city side is doing the same. They're active there every day. I know the people walking through the door. We get to see them all the time. So it's I hate to say old home week, but we are working through this process. We're on the calls as well for the OPM calls, OAC calls on Thursday. We take many different tours. We have one set up 2 days from now for some things that we're, some issues that come along. It's a work in progress, and we know that. And so we're addressing those and what's going to be the resolution, what are the next steps we're going to take. But it is a massive undertaking, and there's lots of moving parts to it. So it's an ongoing process for us, for sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, this motion originates from very early in the calendar year. A number of councils received complaints from the faculty. So we went down there that week, and I was one of them, and saw a number of deficiencies, Commissioner. No, I'm not saying it's your fault, but some minor in comparison to door handles and benches coming off walls in the locker rooms, okay, to some more serious issues, such as equipment failure where a leak, ruined some equipment in the equipment room, in the locker room, some serious damage was done. It wasn't a roof leak, it was an equipment leak. To elevators not working, or, students getting stuck in the elevators. So, and then on Saturday, February the 15th, the entire council went in for a tour, including these deficiencies to see, and we were at or near complete. I'm going to say, if I put a percentage on it, 80 to 85% complete. Now, I would guess now, here we are, April 1st, we should be at or near 100, I would imagine. I know that elevator was very concerning to me. The leak was an equipment failure. It's been repaired, and so is the roof in the locker rooms and the equipment room. I guess that happens, but that's been corrected. But the elevator to me is very concerning, Commissioner. So you know where we stand on that? Has that been rectified?
So I wouldn't say that there's, recently we've had any issues going forward with the elevators. I mean, there's a maintenance contract that's in place with the school department, with the city's contractor for that. They have, maintenance that they come in monthly for and visit. All of the elevators are certified and go through the process annually for the state. So I would say a lot of those things are rectified. I would say one other thing, though, is as we move forward with safety, and if you speak with, some of the elevator technicians that are out there, there are sensors that get added, especially as equipment becomes newer. It's something that they face at Lowell all the time, the same company that services the city, where sometimes it's youngsters in the car And if they're moving around or horseplay at all, a sensor can make the car feel like it might not be operating properly, and that can cause a safety. So I'm not saying that these are all false alarms by any stretch. I'm not making light of that. But I do think, it's something that they have very regular calls to UMass Lowell that they have to go to for such reasons. But I think, overall, I would say we have not really had many issues in these last couple months, certainly.
Okay, well, the OPM will be back in front of the full body next Tuesday, matter of fact, so we're going to hit them up and make sure, but, as we close one phase and enter another, we really need to make sure, Commissioner, and if you need help, let the full body of the council know what you need for resources, but before we move on from one phase to another, we need to make sure everything is 100% complete, because they're only going to be here till, the original schedule was the end of 26. That's probably going to be prolonged now. But once they're gone, we own it, and it's going to be our problem now. So please, you're doing great, but anything you need from the full body, please let us know what you need. Thank you very much.
I really appreciate that support.
Mr. Underwood?
One of the things I'd like to just mention is, there's different levels of repairs, all right? So, for instance, our Mondo flooring, that was, hundreds of thousands of dollars. We've had several repairs to that floor, but that does not make it whole, okay? You would not buy a new car and then they take and put a blue door on it and you would be happy with it and call it a repair. So I still think there's a lot of communications that have to go through the city, through the legal department, through the OPM, through the construction team on what we should expect after the repairs. The Mondo floor now has several checkered cut patches into it. We've got front doors that have been a constant problem since day one, and they just did a repair to it as little as yesterday and sent an email saying, all set, all fixed. I was there this morning, took pictures, looked at it, and I wish I'd have had them for today, but I wasn't able to load them up through the network here today. But they're not repaired. They may be functionable and they may be working, but they're not what we paid for. They don't look what we paid for. The Mondo floor is not what we paid for. The gym team room that had the ceiling fixed, they've been repaired, but it's not what we paid for. So I still think, it's not for me to decide. I don't know if it's for the school department to decide, probably more of the city side, but we have to find out how we are going to be made whole. The things that they've repaired are functionable at best, but they're not what we paid for. So I just want to let everybody know that I don't expect anyone here to go into the high school and look at some of these repairs and go, oh, great. Because in my eyes, they're not great. They're fixed, but it's not what we paid for. Thank you.
Mr. El Rossi?
Yes, as long as we have the city's attention, I would just like to echo the voice that parking is still tough at the Green Knowledge School. There's a lot of issues with ceiling tiles, holes in the wall at the Green Knowledge. Another thing is maybe putting a sign at Nell Street during school's dismissal. People are getting very upset and yelling and swearing at staff. So I just want to put that out there. Like, there are a lot of issues within schools besides just the bigger picture. And if we have the city's attention, then I would like to take that opportunity to say some rooms in some schools, especially the Green Knowledge, need to be painted and cared for. The big thing is parking and parents. And so I just think that we all need to work together to make these things happen among other schools as well, as is documented in School Dude.
Mr. Bahu?
I just want to touch on something real quick. I know that we're getting close to a city council meeting. Realistically, timing is of the issue. And the last thing we want to do is rush this project because it's to the tune of $380 million with over costs that are sort of going in our disfavor. So I know we have a building committee meeting on Thursday, and we're going to find out costs of what this is. I also know we have asbestos issue over in the auditorium that was sort of not found in the initial overview by the architect a number of years ago when they first started this project. Of course, the flooding and the damage and the thickness of the floors, and we still haven't even gotten to the Cumnick Hall yet. So, you know, timeline is a major issue, and we're hoping to open a school. So I know we're going to have conversations moving forward, but this is something that's very stressful, not just for the school committee or the city council, but for the whole community. So I'm not sure if we can maybe start considering how we can go ahead and maybe get some of our funds back from the project manager, architect, and the people that have been involved in this project. I guess that was just a comment.
Yes, if I could just ask, we were talking about elevators. We've had a long-standing request at the Bartlett School. I'm wondering where we are on the elevator situation over there, the lifts and...
So the elevators, so we're replacing all 3 lifts at that school. So those will be completed, you know, as we lead into the end of school. And then the elevator itself is there. It's not, we've not really had issues. There have been, you know, I think occasionally you'll run into an issue with, you know, it's down there, it's back up the same day. They're very responsive that way. I think we're looking more holistically as like, you know, the 68 or so different units across the entire district and how we'd be able to go through and fund rehab or replacement of cars across the entire district. So that's what's coming.
So in terms of those lifts, that's not happening over April vacation? I had heard that, just
Yeah.
because, you know, we have
Yeah.
19 students in wheelchairs at that school.
At that school. And honestly, I thought it was 21. I'm not second guessing you, but I know it's something to really consider. So I can get an update for Superintendent Skinner as far as the date when the equipment's arriving.
Okay. Motion to adjourn?
And I'll just make one last statement. Mr. Getchia made a recommendation about RFP for our elevators. If they are on delay for what could be a year, it's probably something that we must advertise.
Sure.
Sooner rather than later.
True. Thank you all for your time. So we're meeting again in June. All those in favor of adjourning?